Scott finally said what he shouldn't have. "From next month, I'll be living with Mom, so please clear out your room. I'll bring her directly here once she's discharged from the hospital. It's easier to manage the household when living together." However, seeing my mother-in-law every day means constantly receiving her snide remarks. My heart is already heavy. "I understand," I replied helplessly. Scott intends to force the issue of living with his mother by any means necessary. Rather than arguing and opposing him, I should secretly prepare. I have gained this wisdom over many years. Scott left the house, looking pleased and without suspicion. This is my strategy. It's so simple, I almost laughed. Hours later, while I was resting after tidying up, my phone rang loudly. It was a surprise call from Scott. "What is this?" "The house is empty. I, Charlotte Stewart, am a 45-year-old working mother who serves as a department head at a publishing house. My family consists of my husband and 2 children, a very ordinary household. When we got married, the concept of balancing work and family life was becoming popular. At that time, it was common for women to become housewives after marriage, but Scott supported my decision to work. In response, I have devoted myself to my job, household chores, and childcare since the birth of our children. However, recently, I felt the limit of this burden deepening. My mother-in-law, Michelle, who had always opposed my employment, has recently started to complain. "Charlotte, how long do you intend to keep working? You're neglecting your husband and being an irresponsible daughter-in-law." In our time, work came second, and a wife's duty was to devote herself to the family, she said. "Not only have I been committed to my job, but I've also been diligent in housekeeping and childcare. I felt this was a way to repay Scott for allowing me to work. As a result, both my daughter and son began to help out around the house. My daughter folds the laundry and irons, while my son cleans the bath and fills the tub every day. When I return home, the children have already prepared everything so that I only need to manage the meal preparation and cleanup. I am grateful to them for this arrangement." However, despite both of us working, Scott does not help at all. I've asked him several times to assist with household chores, but his response is always the same. "I allowed you to continue your job. Are you trying to make me do the housework because you want to ease your own burden without fulfilling your duties as a wife? You're being pampered." Additionally, each time this happens, he reports to my mother-in-law, and I receive cold words from her. "Scott is the main breadwinner of the house, right? Why would you make him do the housework? That's why it's said that working women are not good. Understand? You're the one demanding to work. Comprehend that. Lately, perhaps my mother-in-law has too much free time. Every night, such unpleasant calls come in. Both my children and I are tired of the frequency and content of these calls. Recently, my children often pretend they are calling me to hang up the phone. Indeed, I'm grateful that I was allowed to work, but why must I be criticized so much? I'm handling both housework and childcare alone. Even my mother-in-law should understand how hard it is to balance housework and childcare. What does she want from me? Currently, I am under considerable stress. Having my children on my side is my only comfort. This feeling is due to issues related to Scott's salary. In fact, Scott's salary is not very high, rather, it's on the lower end. He failed to find a good job initially and managed to get a position at a small company through relatives. If he had strived, I would have supported him without complaint, despite the low income. However, Scott was disappointed with his employment through connections. At first, he often complained I should have worked at a much larger and more prestigious company. He just did the work he was told to do and neglected efforts for promotion or to find another job. If he really had the skills, he would have continued to learn and upgrade his skills while working and made efforts to find a new job. But Scott neglected such efforts. As a result, his salary has remained limited to minor raises, with his performance pay and commissions always minimal. On the other hand, the company where I work is a major domestic firm that established maternity and paternity leave systems early on, and has continued stable management even during economic bubbles, never reducing salaries. Currently, I have been promoted to department head and have successfully managed numerous contracts and projects. As a result, I earn considerably more than Scott. Additionally, my children are under my care, and I directly set aside their tuition fees from my salary. I have made the most of the corporate benefits of a large company. Looking back, even when I was on unpaid maternity leave, we lived off my savings. It would have been impossible to cover the household expenses, including those of our children, with just Scott's salary. I have never received any contribution towards household expenses from Scott, and there are no records of any transfers from him. He probably allowed me to continue working because he wanted to rely on my salary. This thought has been growing stronger recently. I suspect that our post-marriage life has been largely financed by my earnings. To verify this suspicion, I checked my bank account. Housing expenses, utilities, food, and the children's educational expenses. I've paid for all of them. There's not a single deposit from Scott. All I could do was laugh tiredly. Scott's salary is spent on his hobbies and sending money to his mother. I've been grateful that Scott allowed me to continue working and have taken on both household chores and childcare. However, looking at the current situation, I pay all the living expenses while Scott freely spends his own salary. As the main financial supporter, I can say that I am the pillar of the family. Scott can afford to act freely because I cover the living expenses, and any favor of letting me work has been fully repaid. Yet, Scott always says, "I'm supporting the family. If you have a complaint, you can leave." On what basis does he make such claims? He might be under the mistaken impression that he's handling the living expenses while freely spending his own salary. It's completely baffling and incomprehensible. Sometimes I think about the outcome if I took the children and left the house, excluding all living expenses I've been covering. Or if I confronted him with this bank account and ordered him to leave the house, would Scott obediently comply? However, claiming himself as the pillar of the household, he might report me again to his mother. Does his mother understand the difference in our incomes? No, if she did, she wouldn't make such sarcastic remarks. She must think of him as a wonderful son who supports the family and has graciously allowed me to work. How would she react if she knew the truth about our incomes? Perhaps she would turn against Scott and come to my side. However, I want to avoid such a situation. What would become of Scott and his mother if I left? Sometimes, fed up with her harsh words, I find myself pondering this. While I was lost in these thoughts, my mother-in-law fell at home and injured her leg. She will need to be hospitalized for a while for treatment and rehabilitation. Since my father-in-law passed away before our marriage and she lived alone, either Scott or I would need to take care of her. Why are you leaving me to suffer? Hurry to the hospital. My leg hurts so much I can't move, and there's a lot I need to ask of you. She called me immediately during her hospitalization. When I answer the phone, she only demands things bring this. I want that. When I tell her I'm at work, she berates me fiercely. Because of my busy work schedule, I've decided to leave her care to Scott. The cold remarks from her due to my job are particularly stressful. Now, I think the best solution is to have Scott go to the hospital and placate his mother. When I ask Scott to take care of his mother, he immediately complains. "Why don't you look after Mom, Charlotte? I'm working too," he says. Despite being her son, he tries to push all the responsibility onto me. I think he should handle it himself, at least for the first few times. Suppressing my feelings, I respond, "I'm also working, and there are household chores. If you could help with the housework, I could go too. I think your mother would be happier to see you there." This is the truth. My mother-in-law may think of harassing her daughter-in-law as a way to relieve stress, but when mobility is limited, it's better to think positively and speak positively. For various reasons, I have been intentionally avoiding caring for my mother-in-law. On the other hand, I take care to wash and fold her laundry neatly and pack it in her bag. When she requests shopping, I pay close attention to the specific products she wants. I don't mind if these are seen as Scott's achievements, even if I am the one who is criticized. Right now, I especially want to avoid hearing her sarcasm. Fortunately, my predictions were correct. Day by day, my mother-in-law greets Scott with a smile. Being pampered by her son seems to greatly please a mother with her personality. Having her beloved son nearby seems to make her happier than making sarcastic remarks. She eagerly awaits Scott's visits every evening after work, looking forward to their conversations. She hands the shopping list to Scott, and since her hospitalization, she hasn't called me even once. Seeing her smile, Scott feels he is doing good deeds, and he returns home in a good mood. At night, when Scott comes home, he passes me the laundry and shopping lists without complaining as before. Although I receive some grumbles from Scott when handing over her belongings, I still manage to live my days peacefully. That's enough for me. Right now, I am determined to avoid my mother-in-law's sarcasm at all costs. Sometimes, I mutter to myself in the middle of the night, if only I could live in peace for a little while longer. However, the injuries my mother-in-law sustained at her age are likely to be prolonged. I strongly urge Scott to encourage her rehabilitation, but she often neglected it, looking forward to her son's visits. As a result, by the time her injuries healed, her leg strength had already declined. Scott goes to the hospital in the evening after work, but until then, my mother-in-law simply waits, abandoning rehabilitation and just anticipating her son's visit. She has grown fond of her son's care, and Scott has become accustomed to her various requests. Although it's rare for me to be called directly, I am actually the one doing the laundry. Daily chores like shopping and preparing snacks have become routine. My mother-in-law imposes household tasks on me, and she just enjoys pleasant conversations with her son. I'm grateful I don't have to meet her directly, but it's still exhausting. Her demands are many, especially shopping, which is very time-consuming. I understand that you need to distract yourself from boredom, but why do you need so many things? Living alone becomes even more difficult when mobility is impaired. My mother-in-law must feel this too. At that time, she made a significant request to Scott. "Oh, I can't use my leg well anymore. Shopping and cooking are difficult. Scott, don't leave your mom alone." Of course, Scott supports her. "That's a good idea. Let's live together. It will be more convenient for you if Charlotte takes care of you." These two decided to live together without considering my opinion. Scott finally said what he shouldn't have. "From next month, I'll be living with Mom, so please clear out your room. I'll bring her directly here once she's discharged from the hospital. It's easier to manage the household when living together. But that's only from the perspective of the mother-in-law. Every day, facing my mother-in-law would only result in receiving her snide remarks. My heart is already heavy. I understand, I replied helplessly. Scott intends to force the issue of living with his mother by any means necessary. Rather than arguing and opposing him, I should secretly prepare. I have gained this wisdom over many years. Caught between the excitement of Scott and my mother-in-law about the cohabitation, I was considering my escape options. I have a personal room in our home where I gather and study business-related documents. This room contains many books and files. It serves as a study and a workspace, and it is an essential space for the current me. However, Scott has demanded that I give up that room. Losing that room could disrupt my work, potentially causing me to come home even later. Alone, looking at the bookshelf, I muttered to myself, what should I do with these books and documents? It would be a big problem if they were discarded or damaged. Considering living with my mother-in-law, it's clear that these items should not stay at home. It may sound like something out of a TV show, but there really is a risk of the books and documents being thrown away. Especially, the items that are known to be valuable to me are often the first to be tampered with. If I say something, my mother-in-law will feign ignorance and seek Scott's help. Oh, I didn't know these were important documents. Oh, Scott, I'm not at fault yet Charlotte is mad at me. Help me. Once we start living together, there will be no place for me to rest in this house. Continuing to work while being constantly blamed, my spirit will wear thin. What should I do? In this house. Because my mother-in-law is coming to this house, I am. Suddenly, an idea struck me. Why hadn't I realized this simple solution earlier? It seems I was more exhausted than I thought from dealing with her cold remarks and taking over caregiving. It felt as though the fog that had been clouding my vision was gradually lifting. Right, there's absolutely no reason for me to hold back. Why didn't I see such a simple thing before? I murmured and immediately began to prepare. Time passed, and the day of my mother-in-law's discharge arrived. Scott had taken the day off and seemed excited from the morning. Look, from now on, I'll properly take care of Mom. I won't let you do what I've been doing while she was hospitalized, Scott declared, and I quickly changed the subject. That's right, take this. Your mother has been hospitalized for quite a while, after all. The hospital food is bland and not very filling, so she must have been unsatisfied. Since discharge procedures and packing will take us close to lunchtime, why don't you take her out for some delicious food? It's a special day off, and a drive just for the two of you would be nice, right? I'm sure she will enjoy it, I suggested, handing Scott a larger amount of cash than usual. While Scott did have an allowance for living expenses, the amount I gave him this time was significantly more than his usual monthly allowance. Scott was thrilled by the unexpected windfall. Wow, you really think on your feet, don't you? Then I'll use this money to take Mom out for a drive. I'll let you know what we decide about dinner. You make sure everything at home is ready for Mom to be comfortable. Scott left the house happily, without any suspicion. This was my strategy. It was so simple, it almost made me laugh. This should buy me some time. I was eager for Scott and his mother to return home. While waiting, I proceeded to organize the house. I needed to finish arranging everything before Scott and his mother returned. A few hours later, while I was resting after finishing the organization, my phone rang loudly. It was a surprise call from Scott. "What's this?" "The house is empty." In fact, while Scott was out picking up his mother, I had moved my belongings to a new house I had rented. Of course, I had left behind only Scott's few personal items and his mother's bedding. "Oh, you're back already? You said to clear out the room, so I cleared out the room and the living room to make sure your mother could be comfortable. Now, you two can enjoy your time together," I replied calmly. Scott exploded in anger. "This isn't a joke. There's nothing left in the living room or kitchen. How could you do this when I'm the one supporting us?" The familiar line was thrown out again. How foolish to believe that he could demonstrate superiority. No, in reality, I was the one supporting the family, and that included you. You've been spending your salary on allowances for your mother and on your own pleasures, haven't you? And even asking for personal spending money from the household budget. How can you claim that you are supporting the family with such actions? Scott was surprised by my challenge but quickly retorted. His theory was completely nonsensical. "Quiet. As a man, I am the head of the house. You, as my wife, should obey. Put the furniture back immediately." "No, I won't. The living room furniture and the kitchen appliances were all purchased with my salary. Don't worry, the children are with me. I've paid for the rent, utilities, and groceries. In short, I am the pillar of this house. Why did you proceed to live with your mother without consulting me? I can't stay with someone who acts so unilaterally. As you wished, from now on you'll have to fend for yourself," I said. And it seemed like Scott had an epiphany. "Wait, what about the rent for this house?" "Yes, I will cover all payments until the end of this month, but from next month, I'll pass that responsibility to you. The payments for electricity, gas, and internet have already had their direct debit stopped, so you'll need to manage those yourself," I said. It seemed Scott finally understood the situation. In response, his mother exploded in anger, raising her voice in a frenzy. "I can't believe I have such a terrifying daughter-in-law. What are you thinking, using the fact you work to pressure him? Enough is enough. I plan to live here luxuriously with Scott." At that moment, I wondered if she truly understood the reality of Scott's income. Living a luxurious life would indeed be wonderful. However, whether that's possible depends on your son's income. "Anyway, this is goodbye," I said calmly. "Wait, Charlotte, where are you?" Scott asked, but I hung up the phone and immediately blocked both his and his mother's contacts. What follows is as you might imagine. With Scott's salary from a small company where he showed little initiative, the amount left after paying rent and utilities was very minimal. In a house too large for a family of 4, Scott and his mother frequently clashed. "What is this? What kind of meal is this? Don't you care to feed your parents something decent?" His mother would scream. "Be quiet. If you have a complaint, make something yourself. You skip rehab and hate walking. You don't help with the housework at all. You're just a burden," Scott would retort. Thus, their lives seemed to be filled with tension and dissatisfaction. Due to neglecting rehab, his mother's leg strength had deteriorated, and she had become completely resistant to any form of physical therapy at home. Her inability to move as smoothly as before likely contributed to significant frustration. The woman who once showed deep affection for Scott had transformed, making unreasonable demands. Her change might be a symptom of early-stage dementia. Her pension alone places them in a very tough situation. If they move to a smaller, more suitable residence for 2, their life would likely become much easier. However, Scott doesn't seem to come up with such creative solutions. Since I cut off communication with Scott and his mother, I haven't received any messages from them. The children also blocked Scott and his mother's contacts when we started a new chapter as a family. Currently, Scott doesn't know where we live, and he has completely lost any means to seek help from us. If this situation continues, their living conditions will likely become unsustainable. With the help of my children, I've been able to secure a decent income and a nice apartment. The children each have their own rooms, and I use a spacious room as both my bedroom and workspace. The rent is a bit high, but the amount saved by separating from Scott allows us to comfortably afford it. Previously, the children suffered from their father's demeaning words towards me, but now they are enjoying a free and comfortable life. They are more serious about household chores now, and take responsibility for their tasks without being criticized by their father, willingly helping around the house. In such an environment where gratitude and praise are naturally extended when children help, I am truly relieved that we haven't gone down the wrong path. Today, after another busy day, it's time to return to the apartment where my beloved children are waiting. Following these developments, I sent Scott a divorce petition through a lawyer. Despite me having supported the family financially for a long time, he and his mother had nearly depleted their earnings. This is a sufficient reason to file for divorce. Scott refused the divorce and made various excuses, but my lawyer quickly dismissed his claims. Abandoning family responsibilities, not contributing financially, and verbal abuse are considered economic abuse. Under these circumstances, if taken to court, Scott's chances of winning are extremely low. The court granted me custody of the children. Furthermore, I did not request alimony or property division, choosing instead to waive those rights. Because the savings I accumulated have all been earmarked for the children's future education, it would be completely unacceptable for me to give any of that money to Scott or his mother. My car is in my name, and fortunately, the house we lived in was a rental property, which helped us avoid further complications that could have arisen had we owned a home. Now, without facing criticism from anyone, I am able to focus on my work. This allows me to provide the kind of activities my children desire, for which I am grateful. Additionally, with the college funds that I have been gradually saving over time, combined with future income, I anticipate being able to cover at least the cost of my children's university education. Let's give today our all. I motivate myself as a new day begins.
I'm going to live in this high-rise apartment with my mom. I want a divorce. I couldn't hide my confusion at the sudden statement my husband made. It seems like my husband was planning to live in the high-rise apartment I inherited from my father with his mother after our divorce. I wonder what he's thinking. I have had my share of frustrations regarding my husband ever since our marriage. Yet, I never considered divorce because there were aspects of him I respected. However, I never dreamt he would suggest starting a life with his mother in the home I inherited. As I stood dumbfounded, my husband, with a condescending smile, said, "I'll divorce you and just take this property." I must be really lucky. Seriously. The moment I saw his unpleasant smile, my love for him completely vanished. My name is Stacy. I'm a 28-year-old office worker. I managed to join the company I've long admired as a new graduate and have been vigorously working ever since. People often say, "You're a typical career woman." Being devoted to my job, I had never experienced a serious relationship, and neither was I particularly keen on marriage, thinking that living alone wasn't such a bad idea. Yet, a turning point in my life came. One day, my father called me with an unexpected proposition. "Stacy, you're 28 now. How about trying matchmaking?" I received an offer from someone I owe a favor to. What? Matchmaking. I think I'll pass. I still want to work. I was surprised and declined immediately as I had never considered matchmaking. Don't say that. Why not try meeting him just once? If you find a nice partner, I'll also be able to rest assured. I want to see you as a bride. How can I refuse if you put it like that? Fine. I'll meet him. My father had been unwell for several months and was currently being cared for by my mother at home. His health hasn't been great recently. Knowing his condition, I couldn't ignore my father's wish to see me as a bride, so I was left with no choice but to accept to meet up with the guy he wanted to match me with. That's great, Stacy. Thank you. I hope you get along well with him. Yes, I'd be happy if he's passionate about his work. The day of the meetup arrived. The man, Ted, was 27 years old, a year younger than me. He loved his job so much that he never got to stay in a long-lasting relationship because he was so busy. Seems like we're a pretty good match. I've also prioritized work over everything else so far. Really? We might get along well then. Ted smiled kindly. We hit it off quickly, and before we knew it, we were married. Our parents were very happy, and we were blessed by many as we started our newlywed life in a rented apartment. Later, my parents bought a high-rise apartment nearby and moved in. It was challenging for them to live in the countryside. Having my parents close by was better for frequent visits and immediate support, so I was pleased they decided to move into the high-rise apartment. 2 years had passed since Dad and I got married. Our marriage, which started off smoothly, gradually began to face troubles. The issue was Ted's growing fondness for his mother, frequently inviting her over without discussing it with me. I wanted to spend quiet weekends after a busy week, but Ted started inviting his mother over without consulting me. His mother lived about a 10-minute drive from our place, and she had been living alone ever since my father-in-law passed away 5 years ago. While he initially didn't invite his mother frequently, he recently started to invite her over every week. Oh, right. My mom is coming over today. When Ted casually mentioned it, I couldn't hold back any longer. What, again? But she was here last week and the week before. I wish we could spend some time alone occasionally. What are you saying? Since my dad's passing, she's been feeling lonely. What's wrong with inviting her over once a week? Ted yelled, furious at my suggestion. I might have accepted the weekly visits if his mother were kinder. But every time she would come over, she would take groceries and household items without even asking. Even when I protested, "It bothers me when you take things without permission," she would respond, "Don't be so stingy. You're working, no?" and dismissed my concerns. Furthermore, she criticized every little thing, from a speck of dust in the corner to the seasoning of my cooking, and would always be critical of how I managed household chores. What was worse was, she did these things out of Ted's sight, which made the problem even more serious. Ted thought of his mother as someone who, despite her sad fate of losing her spouse, lived a modest life alone. Ted, I've told you before, but your mother takes groceries without asking and always finds something to criticize about how I manage the household. It's frustrating, I said. You're lying again. My mom would never do such a thing. Stop belittling her. Ted shouted back, clearly angry. No matter how much I explained, Ted refused to listen. He loved his mother dearly and trusted her completely. Because of this ongoing situation, my affection for Ted had gradually faded. However, aside from the issue with his mother, Ted was rational. He was dedicated and diligent in his work, respected by his colleagues and subordinates, and often received calls for work-related consultations. I, too, am someone who dedicates herself to her work, so I appreciated Ted's work ethic. Although his company wasn't very large and his salary wasn't high, he worked hard and earnestly there. This respect for him prevented me from considering divorce at that time. But around the same time, my father, who had been dealing with health issues for a long time, passed away. He left this world quietly, as if he just fell asleep. After the funeral and when things had settled down, my mother decided to use the inheritance to move to a quiet apartment in the suburbs. And so, I inherited the high-rise apartment. The high-rise apartment was more conveniently located near the station than our current one. That evening, I proposed to Ted that we move there. I've inherited the high-rise apartment where my parents used to live. My mom has decided to move to a different one in the suburbs. How about we move to the high-rise one? Of course, it will be after my mom moves out. Upon hearing my suggestion, Ted's face lit up and he exclaimed, "Lucky," and started to celebrate. He then took out his phone and made a call. "Hello, Mom. I have some great news." He seemed to be talking to his mother, telling her that I had inherited my father's high-rise apartment. After ending the call, Ted turned to me with a smug smile and made a demand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Give me the keys." "What?" I was taken aback and reflexively asked him to clarify. "I mean the keys to the high-rise apartment. I want to go check it out. I know the place and have visited before, but I haven't thoroughly checked it out apart from the living room. I'll just go and see." "What are you planning?" "My mom is still there. What if you disturb her by suddenly showing up? Besides, it's already late." I felt an ominous premonition about Ted's high spirits. "Oh, right. Your mom is still there. Let's at least look at it from the outside then." I didn't understand his urgency, but Ted couldn't wait and I ended up accompanying him. The high-rise apartment was about a 15-minute walk from our current one. On the way there, the uneasiness I was feeling didn't subside. The reason for my uneasiness was Ted's unusually excited demeanor since learning I inherited the high-rise apartment, which seemed somewhat creepy. His eyes seemed to glow with ambition. Still, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Standing in front of the high-rise apartment and looking up at the 40-story building, Ted exclaimed in amazement. "Wow, looking at it again, it's really big. Living here would be." And all of a sudden, he made an unbelievable statement. "I'm going to live in this high-rise apartment with my mom. I want a divorce." I couldn't hide my confusion at the sudden statement my husband made. I had a feeling that Ted was eyeing the high-rise apartment, but I never expected him to bring up divorce. It seems like my husband was planning to live in the high-rise apartment I inherited from my father with his mother after our divorce. I wonder what he's thinking. I have had my share of frustrations regarding my husband ever since our marriage. Yet, I never considered divorce because there were aspects of him I respected. However, I never dreamt he would suggest starting a life with his mother in the home I inherited. As I stood dumbfounded, my husband, with a condescending smile, said, "I'll divorce you and just take this property." I must be really lucky. Seriously. The moment I saw his unpleasant smile, my love for him completely vanished. I was taken aback by his statement but responded calmly, "Ted, it seems you might be misunderstanding something, but inheritance doesn't automatically go to the spouse." "What? What are you talking about?" Ted laughed as if he didn't understand my words at all. "I mean, this high-rise apartment is something I inherited, so it can't become yours. Inheritance laws don't apply to shared property." Even when I explained again, Ted said, "That's a joke. I won't believe such a lie." Okay, I was just perplexed. I didn't think he would be such a difficult person to talk to. "It's funny to see you trying so hard to avoid divorce. Do you love me that much?" "How pathetic," he mocked. Ted's derisive laughter was extremely unpleasant. And at that moment, I realized my feelings for Ted had vanished. There used to be a respectable side to him, but now I only felt discomfort. "If you don't agree to divorce, I'll file for arbitration. I'll live happily in this high-rise apartment with my mom," Ted said with a smirk, and I responded calmly, "I'll agree to the divorce. When we get home, let's write the divorce papers." "Nice. Surprisingly obedient, aren't you?" He answered satisfied, and when we got home, we downloaded and printed the divorce papers from the City Hall's website. Ted signed the divorce papers first, and then I signed. I've completed my part. When I handed over the divorce papers, Ted eagerly took them and said, "I'll hand these in right away," and headed to the City Hall. Thus, our brief 2-year marriage came to an end. However, I couldn't move to the new residence immediately and had to continue living with him in our current place for a while. During this time, I consulted with a lawyer about dividing the property while also preparing to move. My plan was to move to the high-rise apartment I inherited from my father. During this period, my mother-in-law suddenly visited our home. Ted wasn't home, and I had to deal with her alone. When I opened the door, she started shouting, "Why haven't you given us the apartment yet, Stacy? Hand it over to us, quickly." As I've explained to Ted several times, that house is something I inherited from my father and I can't give it to you or Ted, I responded calmly. The audacious mother-in-law then said, "Don't be so stingy. You earn a lot, right? You're so busy with work that you neglect household chores, so you must not be struggling with money. It wouldn't hurt if you gave us the property." I firmly refused her demand. "There's no way I'll give you the apartment," and closed the front door. Behind the door, she yelled, "Why are you so insolent? Tad was right to get a divorce from such a daughter-in-law. Hand over the high-rise apartment quickly." But after a while, she quieted down and seemed to have given up and left. That evening, when Ted returned home, I told him about his mother's visit. "Today, your mother came. Seems like she's expecting to live in the high-rise apartment. She hurled insults at me, and I can't take it anymore." Then Ted, as if thinking his mother had been insulted, suddenly began yelling hysterically, "What's with that attitude? My mom just wants to live in the high-rise apartment with me as soon as possible. You're the problem for not handing it over. My mom isn't at fault. Stop being stubborn and give us the property now." It's not about being stubborn. It's legally established that inheritance doesn't become shared property. It's exempt from property division. Do I need to explain it again? Even as I tried to explain, Ted wouldn't listen. I eventually successfully completed the property division process, but it took extra time and money because Ted made a fuss about not getting the high-rise apartment. Therefore, I decided to bill all the divorce expenses to him. After my mother moved to the suburban apartment, I decided to relocate to the high-rise apartment. I completed the move without Ted knowing. After moving to my new home, I changed all my contact information, cutting off all ties with him. I was worried for a while that he might come over, but fortunately, there were no signs of him coming, and months had passed. I was relieved, thinking he had accepted the reality that he couldn't live here. However, something unexpected happened. On a holiday, while I was relaxing at home, the bell suddenly rang. At that moment, I murmured to myself, "Has he finally come?" When I looked at the intercom monitor, there he was, as expected. I considered ignoring him for a while, but he persistently rang the bell, and thinking of the neighbors, I reluctantly went to the door. When I opened it, Ted was furious and shouted, "Why did you change your phone number? You've changed your email address too, right? Why didn't you tell me your new contact information? Why should I? I have no obligation to explain to you. The divorce was completed and we're no longer husband and wife, and the property division is settled, so we have nothing to do with each other anymore. Don't say nonsensical things." As I responded calmly, Ted became even more enraged. "Don't make lame excuses. I'm really angry. That's clearly not a lame excuse." Having a reasonable conversation with him was impossible, and it gave me a headache. Ted continued to shout as if he was about to pounce me. "Why can't I have this property? Because of that, I've been laughed at by my friends. It's all your fault." "Laughed at by your friends? What do you mean?" When I asked, Ted was silent for a while before starting to speak slowly. Seems like he had bragged to his friends about having bought a high-rise apartment when we filed for divorce and I inherited this property. Envied by his friends, Ted didn't want to hear anything about how the property division didn't allow him to get the apartment and mistakenly thought that if he kept fighting, he would eventually obtain it. Even so, I've been scorned and ridiculed by my friends as a braggart for not living in the high-rise apartment, and my mother is pressuring me about when we can move in. "You're responsible for this situation." Hearing Ted's complaints, I was just astonished and lost for words. Essentially, he was blaming me for his own frustrations. I was beginning to feel foolish to continue further discussions with him, and said, "It's not my fault. I've tried to explain to you many times that the high-rise apartment is not included in the property division. There's nothing more to talk about. Please leave," and tried to close the door. However, Ted wedged his foot in the door, preventing me from closing it. "Move your foot." "Shut up. I won't leave until you say you'll hand over the high-rise apartment. You're making me look like an idiot." Ted glared at me with bloodshot eyes. "If you won't leave, I'll call the police." "Hoot, call them. Don't think such threats will make me back down. I must get this property at any cost." While Ted dismissed the threat, I calmly took out my cell phone from my pocket. "Wait, are you seriously calling the police?" Ignoring Ted's nervous whisper, I completed the call to the police. Ted turned pale and shouted, "I didn't think you'd actually call the police. Are you crazy?" and quickly left the scene. In the following days, life returned to normal, and it seemed the shock of being reported to the police made Ted avoid contacting me. However, 3 months later, I found an envelope in my home's mailbox. It had no addressee, suggesting someone had delivered it directly. Who could this be from? I muttered to myself as I turned the envelope over to find Ted's name written on it. Shocked, I cautiously opened the envelope, wary of any dangerous contents. Inside were 3 letters, written in Ted's handwriting, detailing his recent circumstances. The letter began as follows: "To Stacy, since I can no longer reach you, I am honestly sharing my current situation through this letter. Please read it to the end." With a mix of curiosity and annoyance, I began to read the letter. As I read on, it became clear that soon after our divorce, Ted had found a new lover and planned to live with her and his mother in this high-rise apartment. However, when it became apparent that Ted could not secure this place, the lover, who was merely attracted by the allure of the apartment, left him. Moreover, Ted had given her expensive gifts, which made him go into a significant amount of debt. He had also talked about purchasing the high-rise apartment at work, leading to unbearable cold stares from colleagues, ultimately causing him to resign. It appeared that his mother, who had been counting on living in the high-rise apartment, had been spending extravagantly and was now facing tough times without the expected support from Ted. The letter concluded with "I have laid everything out honestly. So, please, I'm begging you, could you lend me some money? Just $10,000 would be enough. If you wish, we could even consider starting over." I had no intention of replying or reconsidering our relationship. Ted's assertive demeanor throughout the letter only elicited a sigh from me. It seemed that Ted was in a dire situation and had reached out to me for financial aid. I tossed the letter into the trash and immediately headed to the real estate agent. Given the possibility of Ted showing up at my current place and not wanting to receive such bewildering letters again, I decided to sell it, although it was a place I had inherited from my father, making me feel somewhat guilty. I believed my father would forgive me if it were for my happiness. My mother also agreed with my decision. I then proceeded to purchase another high-rise apartment, one with an even better location, which admittedly was quite expensive. However, thanks to my hard work and savings, I didn't hesitate to splurge on it. Of course, I didn't share my new address with Ted, so now I was finally able to live with peace of mind. I resolved to focus on my work again, renewing my commitment to my career.
You've built quite a wonderful home, haven't you? Mrs. Brown, what brings you here all of a sudden? Well, I heard you were building a house, so I just came to visit. My mother-in-law suddenly visited the new house. Honestly, I didn't like her very much. Talking with her was as exhausting as a few days of work. Just a moment, please. I haven't tidied up there yet. Oh, this room is lovely. Ignoring my warning, she freely explored the room. When I looked at my husband, he was smiling as if enjoying something. He probably found my interaction with his mother amusing. Then, out of the blue, she declared, "I will use this room. No more living alone for me. From now on, you will have to take care of me." What? That's impossible. But I have permission to live here. Michael had apparently informed her so. I'm sorry, but that's not possible. Why? Everything is ready. I had to tell her a desperate fact. Because we are not planning to live in this house. What? I will never forget the look of surprise on her face at that moment. This was a revenge for the time she had belittled us. My name is Sandra. I am 32 years old, living with my husband Michael, who is the same age. We have been married for 3 years, and each day has been very fulfilling. Life has been enjoyable. However, there were some challenges even before we got married. We're heading to my parents' house now, but be prepared as things could get troublesome. Huh? What do you mean? I can't say much now, but I will explain later. All right, I'll prepare myself mentally. This warning from Michael came as we were about to leave to greet his parents before getting married. Initially, I thought it was just a matter of etiquette, but it turned out to be more than that. I touched on this earlier, but my mother can be quite troublesome, and she tends to look down on people outside the family. I'm worried about that. Moreover, she has been particularly harsh on people recently for no particular reason. Michael was smiling, but there was a serious concern behind his expression. Being so explicitly warned made me incredibly anxious about what kind of person I was about to meet. Finally, when we arrived at his parents' house, an unexpected event awaited us. So, could you tell me about your siblings, Sandra? I have one younger brother. And what do your parents do? My father is a university professor, and my mother is a housewife. Foon, that's quite impressive. After that, each question was directed at me, and one after another felt like a barrage. In the middle, I felt enveloped in a very unpleasant sensation, as if undergoing a harsh interrogation. Glancing at Michael's face, it was filled with a sullenness that seemed to say, "See, I told you." Well, I acknowledge the marriage, but now that you will be welcomed as a member of our family, you must follow my instructions. Can you accept that? Yes, I will follow them. Thus the marriage greeting somehow concluded, but to put it bluntly, it was a hellish experience. The tension was unending, and I was constantly tormented by the fear of what words might come next. How was it? Are you okay? Michael asked. My stomach hurt so much I couldn't stand it. I felt the same way. I couldn't relax at all. On the way home, we exchanged wry smiles, realizing that this event was just a prelude. We decided to distance ourselves as much as possible. Avoiding contact seemed the best way to prevent further issues. However, this resolution would be tested sooner than expected. Sandra, how about coming to our house for a little while next weekend? I'm sorry, but I have plans that weekend. You should be able to come for a little while. Didn't you promise to obey? At that moment, I regretted making such a troublesome promise. Indeed, I had said so, but it was not meant in that sense. Also, when you come next time, please come alone. Thank you. Being asked to visit alone, I felt a heavy weight sink into my chest. I immediately discussed this with Michael. What on earth is she thinking? Even I can't understand her, and I'm her son. But surely she won't do anything strange. Well, that's hard to tell. What? Hearing Michael's uncertain reply, my willingness to go faded even more. At that moment, I even considered using a fake illness. If anything happens, contact me immediately. I'll come to pick you up right away. Thank you. Just those words make me stronger. And then, the fateful day arrived. When I arrived at the family home, There sat my sister-in-law next to my mother-in-law. I hadn't seen her since the wedding, and I didn't think highly of her. The reason was that she resembled my mother-in-law. "Thank you for coming all the way here today." "Yes, so what's the purpose of today?" "I thought I'd show you what it means to become our daughter-in-law." "That's why I called my daughter here too. I wanted to run away from there. However, the two of them wouldn't allow it, and I would come to strongly regret not having pretended to be sick." "First, Sandra, could you please do some cleaning?" "Cleaning? Do it properly." "Until we say you can stop." "What do you mean?" That's when the whole house cleaning began. From sweeping with a broom to mopping and even tidying up each room, a thorough clean was demanded. During this time, my sister-in-law did not help at all. If she found even a small bit of trash left, she made me do it all over again. Before I knew it, 4 hours had passed since I started cleaning. "Could I please take a short break?" "What? Someone who can't even clean properly doesn't need a break." "Start again quickly. Just 5 minutes. Stop nagging." With that, my sister-in-law forcefully kicked a bucket filled with dirty water. The water started spreading quickly. Who did she think would clean this up? Then, my mother-in-law appeared. "How long are you going to keep doing this?" "She won't follow any instructions at all." "Mom, say something." All I could do was look up at the sky. Dealing with my sister-in-law was tough enough, but now the even stricter mother-in-law had joined. "Foon, why did Michael marry someone so incompetent?" "That's obvious, isn't it?" "Because Michael is the same." "Indeed, you're right." At that moment, I suddenly remembered. From what Michael had told me, his late father and my mother-in-law did not get along. According to him, even his father had been at his wits' end with the troublesome mother-in-law. The resentment towards Michael was because he reminded her of her husband. It seemed like such a trivial reason. "She's not good at cleaning, but maybe she can cook." Then, "Let's have you make something." And so, the agony of cooking began. I made several dishes, but I stopped counting halfway through. How can someone make such horrible food? Really? Even my child wouldn't make such food. Did you hear that? If you understand, then hurry up and redo it. I tried to make it again, but I had already reached my limit. If I continued to obey them, I would break down both mentally and physically. The moment I tried to reach for my smartphone. "What are you hiding and doing?" After that, my smartphone was snatched and thrown outside. My last hope was lost. I no longer knew what to think. When people become desperate, this is what happens. Truly a useless daughter-in-law. Can't you even see the meaning of life? Mom, isn't that a bit too much? Even if it's true, don't you think that's a bit cruel to say? The two of them were laughing heartily. Just then, the front door opened and someone came in. I looked up, exhausted. There stood Michael. "Sandra, let's go home." "What are you talking about? Her education isn't finished yet." "What are you saying? This is clearly abuse." "What?" "You have no right to say that." Quietly, Michael took my hand, and we left the house. His demeanor was like that of a prince. Behind us, my mother-in-law shouted, "Do you understand what the consequences of doing this will be?" "Whatever, I'm taking her home." This is how I was freed from that torment. Sorry for being late. It's okay. I believed you would come. I couldn't get through on the phone, so I hurried over. I got stuck in traffic on the way. I see. Ah, the smartphone they threw away is still there. they did that too. Michael couldn't help but sigh. Honestly, I never want to go back to my in-laws' house again. Although I was somewhat prepared, it meant nothing in front of those two. To me, those two were no longer mere humans, but something else. But I'm really worried if this is really okay. I can't get what your mother said out of my head. Let's just ignore all contacts from them for now. It's best until things calm down. That's true. Despite intermittent contacts from my mother-in-law, we consistently ignored them. Our peaceful life continued. Then, one day, about 3 months later, the doorbell rang. Hey, was someone supposed to visit us today? No, we didn't have any plans. When I went to check the front door, there stood my mother-in-law, who I had been desperately hoping to avoid. It was the worst possible timing. It's been a while. I've been trying to contact you, but you've kept ignoring me. My mother-in-law entered the house boldly. It was clear that this would lead to troublesome situations. Mrs. Brown, why are you here? What? Am I not allowed to visit? I just came to check on my son. But to visit without any prior contact. Michael seemed helpless in front of his mother. I started to look for a way to send her back. I didn't want our stable days to be disturbed any further. By the way, this house has no charm at all. Do you actually enjoy living here? Of course. We just don't waste money on unnecessary things, unlike some people. Are you referring to me? Not specifically. A confrontation with my mother-in-law seemed imminent. I just wanted her to leave as soon as possible. However, there was no sign of her leaving. At that moment, Michael stepped in. Sorry, but we're actually heading out now, so it would help if you could leave for today. Well then, I'll wait here. Have a good time. You're not trying to get rid of me by lying, are you? I could feel the malice in her character. It was clear that continuing the argument would get us nowhere. In the end, we changed our plans and went out. 2 hours later, I received a message from her. I'll be leaving now. Take care. What? Mrs. Brown, wait a second. The call ended abruptly. I was relieved for the moment, but when we returned home, it looked as if it had been ransacked. My mother-in-law most likely had intentionally made a mess to blame us. What is this? It might have been revenge. Anyway, we need to clean up. We continued cleaning up late into the night, not finishing until after midnight. We reached the point where I felt we no longer needed to hold back against my in-laws. We resolved to find a way to retaliate against my mother-in-law. Although my sister-in-law was also problematic, we expected her to self-destruct, so we decided to just watch and not intervene. I've reached my limit. I want to do something about this stress before it destroys me. It's unbearable, even though she's my own mother. What can I do to teach her a lesson? If only there was a way to change her fundamentally. But is that really okay? I have approval from Dad. He said I could do whatever I wanted before he passed away. I'm relieved to hear that. Then there's no need to hold back. While we were talking and watching TV, news came that a major storm had directly hit my hometown. At that moment, an indescribable sense of anxiety overwhelmed me. This is about your hometown, right? Yes, I hope everything is okay. Then a call came from my parents. Dad, what's wrong? Sandra. The house has been destroyed. Is it because of the recent storm? Yes, I don't know what to do. I'll think of something here. So don't do anything strange. I immediately told Michael about the situation. We had been busy with my mother-in-law's problems. but I was ready to do anything for my parents. I wanted to take measures quickly. How about we build them a new house? Really? If that's possible, they would definitely be happy. And how about building it nearby this time, to bring them closer? That sounds good. I'll cover the costs. No, since it was my idea. Let's share the costs. But this is my family's issue. Thus, we decided to build a new home for my parents. We chose to provide the best house possible. The total cost amounted to $800,000 money we had saved from our past efforts. I did not hesitate because it was for my parents. They will surely be happy. Without a doubt, they will be. Thus, the project to build my parents' house began. I looked forward to the completion, imagining how happy my parents would be. The construction progressed smoothly and was nearing completion when it seems Mom has done something again. What has she done? I don't really understand why she's decided this, but it seems she wants to leave the old house and live somewhere new. She always comes up with bizarre ideas. Hearing this, an idea popped into my head. Just thinking about it almost made me burst into laughter. Is something wrong? I've come up with a funny plan. If it works, we might be able to surprise your mother. What kind of plan? It sounds really fun. Tell me more. I shared the plan with Michael and asked him to implement it once the house was finished. It had been a while since I'd seen Michael so lively. I felt the same way. Now that the house is finished, we can really get started. Leave it to me. She'll definitely fall for it. The success of this operation depends on you. I'm counting on you. Together with Michael, we did a final check and informed my mother-in-law about the plan. This was the beginning of our little revenge against her. As expected, my mother-in-law visited the next day. You've built quite a wonderful home, haven't you? Mrs. Brown, what brings you here all of a sudden? Well, I heard you were building a house, so I just came to visit. My mother-in-law suddenly visited the new house. She entered the house as if it were her own. I still couldn't open my heart to her. Honestly, I didn't like her very much. Talking with her was as exhausting as a few days of work. I had lost any affection for her, but I couldn't avoid the situation. Just a moment, please. I haven't tidied up there yet. Oh, this room is lovely. Ignoring my warning, she freely explored the room. When I looked at Michael, he was smiling as if enjoying something. He probably found my interaction with his mother amusing. Then, out of the blue, she declared, "I will use this room. No more living alone for me. From now on, you will have to take care of me." This was exactly as we had anticipated. How naive she could be. And thus, a new chapter in the story began. What? That's impossible. But I have permission to live here. Who told you that? I confronted Michael. However, Michael wasn't flustered. Michael and I had discussed this beforehand, and even me confronting him was part of the plan. My mother-in-law, thinking a fight was starting, stepped in. Please don't fight. We're family now and should live together. That's when I threw the line I had decided on. Oh, I'm sorry, but that's not possible. Why not? Everything is ready. Because we are not planning to live in this house. What? Wait a moment. I've already sold my house and decided to live here. I still haven't forgotten the look of surprise on her face. This was retribution for how she had belittled us. You must be misunderstanding something, poor thing. Then, my mother-in-law turned to Michael. Michael, what's going on? Explain. There's nothing to explain. Sandra told you exactly how it is, and although I originally thought it would be nice to live together with my parents. What did you say? However, I really prefer not to live together. That's absurd. It was unbearable to see my mother-in-law shouting. If she were to destroy this house, I wouldn't be able to explain it to my parents. So I decided to completely distance myself from her. Please leave. There is no place for you in this house, Mrs. Brown. Wait a moment. Then who will live in this house? My parents will live here. Do you understand? Where am I supposed to live then? My mother-in-law seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. Her energy noticeably deflated. Everything was going according to plan. Michael and I couldn't hide our joy at seeing her like that. Don't worry, your daughter is around, right? You'll be fine. But she's going through a tough time right now with her divorce. She can't afford to help. I knew this fact from Michael and had suggested it based on that information. But it might be a bit mean. That's unfortunate. But it has nothing to do with us. Don't you have any sympathy? I'll return those words to you. I haven't forgotten what happened in the past. That's the situation, so please give up. Thus, we drove my mother-in-law out of the house. The back of my mother-in-law being driven out looked very small. There really was nowhere for her to return to. By the way, I heard from someone I know that my sister is getting divorced. Her ex-husband's decision was wise. Yes, even if she tries to hide her personality, it will eventually be revealed. It's poetic justice that she has ruined herself without our intervention. Afterward, it seems the mother-in-law had to rely on my sister-in-law because she could no longer live at the already sold family home. However, my sister-in-law has been a housewife all her life, so it was extremely difficult to find a job for her. Currently, they are making ends meet in a run-down apartment. Sandra, I apologize for everything in the past. Please help me. What benefit would there be for me to do such a thing? I am your mother-in-law. Even so, I'd rather not. What did you say? My mother-in-law was quite upset in the end, but I was indifferent. I had no intention of sympathizing from the start, and whatever the outcome, it did not concern me. It's been a long time since I've felt this clear-hearted. With no obstacles in the way, fun days were ahead. In the midst of this, my parents made a proposal. Why don't we live together? Ah, but that house was built for you and Dad to live in. That's true, but it's too big for just the two of us, and it would be reassuring if we were all together. Michael and I looked at each other and nodded. Let's do that, we decided. I didn't like imposing self-serving opinions, but I wholeheartedly agreed with such a proposal. Not only was there joy, but there was more surprising news. I'm pregnant. Really. Maybe someone somewhere was watching over us. From now on, we will move forward into a hopeful future with our new family.
We're going to live in this house. You need to leave. It was at that moment that the cunning strategy of the calculating mother-in-law was realized. I had my doubts about my mother-in-law's unusual attitude from the beginning. However, my lack of attention led to a mistake that, in the end, caused the outcome my mother-in-law intended. I was filled with regret, wishing I could have made a different choice at that moment. But it was too late to take action. The divorce papers I impulsively filed were also part of her plan. However, I never imagined that my lack of planning would cause a significant disruption in her scheme. As is often the case in stories, schemes of people who are jealous of the successful and behave in a shady manner often end up not going as they had planned. In the end, only those who are sincere and kind receive the benefits of fortune. My name is Isabella. I quickly became close to my husband, Gabriel, whom I met through a friend, and we soon started dating. Gabriel was 9 years younger than me, but I was swayed by his earnest pursuit, and we got married. However, Gabriel's attitude changed significantly after our marriage. The affectionate gaze he once had disappeared, and his interest in me gradually faded. This change continued even after our child was born, and Gabriel showed no interest in parenting. His job involved frequent transfers, many of which were solitary assignments away from the family. It has been 10 years since we got married, but his return home has become extremely rare. Our son, Sean, is very shy and does not get along with his father, Gabriel. He always hides behind me when they are together. Feeling that I can't rely on Gabriel, I decided to focus on freelance work, which I could do without leaving the house. Since this job provided a stable income, there was no inconvenience in living with just Sean and me. In fact, despite Gabriel's repeated transfers and lack of promotion, I earned more than he did. I live like a single mother, but there is only one problem. That is the issue of living with my husband's parents. In contrast to our cold relationship, my in-laws get along very well, and I have felt envious of their relationship at times. However, after living together for a while, I realized something. On the surface, my in-laws behaved like a loving couple who understood each other, but in reality, their behavior was superficial. My mother-in-law, Helen, treated her husband, Michael, as if he were her own property. Knowing that he would never rebel, she used this to her advantage and bossed him around as she pleased. Justifying her behavior as a means of stress relief, Helen had a coercive attitude toward everyone, whether they were family members or strangers. Her self-centered and domineering behavior was obviously directed at me, who was living with them, and put me under mental pressure. Her pressure was not limited to domineering behavior. Even after 10 years of marriage, she constantly criticized and insulted me for being 9 years older than my husband, Gabriel. Helen often publicly said, "Poor Gabriel marrying an older woman. He deserves a younger and more attractive woman," hurting me. Ironically though, the one that proposed was Gabriel. She ignored that fact and continued to criticize me, hurting my feelings in the process. Even so, while living together, I did not want to unnecessarily worsen our relationship, so I had no choice but to endure in silence. Then, one day, I received an unexpected call from my father. When the phone rang and I picked up the receiver, I was informed by him that my mother, Mary, had been in a traffic accident. Shocked by the sudden news, I immediately rushed to the hospital where my mom had been taken. Arriving at the hospital next to my anxious father, my mother greeted me with a smile and said, "Really, your father tends to overreact. Don't worry, I'm fine." Seeing her healthy appearance and cheerful response, I was relieved that she had not suffered any major injuries. However, the doctor later explained that my mother had a fractured leg. Even after surgery, a full recovery was not expected, and she was likely to have difficulty walking. My mother eventually underwent surgery and was transferred to a rehabilitation facility to aim for recovery and return home. After 6 months of rehabilitation, she became somewhat able to walk, but she could not regain her previous freedom and needed a walker even after returning home. After she was discharged, I decided to spend a few days with her and realized that it would be difficult for my elderly father, who suffers from back pain, to support her daily life alone. As a result, I began visiting my parents' house frequently, juggling work, taking care of my child, and dealing with my in-laws in addition to supporting my parents. My mother-in-law, however, seemed dissatisfied with my choice to take care of my own parents and never offered me a word of comfort despite my busy life. Do you not feel ashamed that a daughter-in-law is neglecting her household duties? My husband and I are exhausted from work, yet what are you doing? She continued to criticize. Despite feeling irritated by her words after my tiring days, I managed to suppress my anger and barely managed to respond with a forced smile. Feeling that I could no longer continue in this situation, I confided in Gabriel about considering living with my own parents. "Well, that sounds tough. But, I'm busy with work. Gabriel responded with the expected lack of interest. Disappointed by Gabriel's half-hearted reception of my desire to leave the in-laws' house, I was disheartened. Well, my parents will manage somehow. What you want to do is up to you. Gabriel's indifferent comment pushed my patience to its limit, and I decided to live with my parents and proceeded with plans to build a duplex house. I informed my in-laws about my parents' situation and the de facto consent I had received from Gabriel. It initially seemed like my mother-in-law would try to stop me from leaving the house, but to my surprise, she smiled kindly and showed consideration for my mother. Oh, was it that difficult? Indeed, it's better to have them close. She responded warmly, which made me suspicious and sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't wholeheartedly accept the superficial kindness of my in-laws and remain cautious. When meeting with the contractor to discuss living arrangements while caring for my parents, for some reason, the in-laws accompanied me every time. Despite feeling uneasy, I couldn't refuse my mother-in-law's strong request and ended up allowing their presence. "We'll be fine, don't worry," they said, observing my consultation with a smile without joining the conversation, but I couldn't understand the meaning behind their actions. Nevertheless, the plans progressed steadily, and the duplex house for me and my parents was completed. Feeling that they were scheming something, I decided to hand over the keys while my mother and father-in-law were at work. After confirming that no one was home, I sighed in relief. That evening, while preparing dinner, my mother-in-law made a sudden, strange suggestion. "I heard the new house is finished. Can I see inside before you move your belongings in? I want to get some ideas for when we might need care in the future," she said in an unnaturally kind tone. Her attitude was clearly suspicious. Overwhelmed by her persistent requests, I eventually agreed to show her the new house the next day. I put the newly received keys in my bag and headed to the car. Strangely, I hadn't seen the father-in-law since the morning, and the mother-in-law said she had urgent business, which felt suspicious to me. During the drive to the new house, my mother-in-law was oddly engrossed in her smartphone in the passenger seat. Though I was driving and couldn't see the details, her behavior seemed unnatural. Arriving at the new house, she looked around restlessly, inspecting the surroundings, while I watched her every move with suspicion and caution. I did not let my guard down. Upon unlocking the front door, she suddenly pushed past me and boldly entered the house. Determined not to let a single scratch mar our new home, I threw my bag into the shoe cabinet beside the entrance and hurried after her. "This house is marvelous," she praised as she walked through the house with a bright demeanor. I closely observed her for any suspicious actions, but nothing seemed amiss at that time. Just as I was about to suggest we leave after my mother-in-law had thoroughly savored every corner of the house, I heard a noise from the supposedly empty entrance. Rushing there, I found my father-in-law smiling warmly. "Finally arrived. You can go ahead and bring the luggage," he called out, and as if on cue, luggage began to be carried in one after another. Confused by what was happening, I tried to stop the influx of belongings but was hindered by my in-laws, and before I knew it, everything was over. "What on earth is going on?" I demanded, and my mother-in-law looked down at me with a smug expression. "We're going to live in this house. You need to leave." At that time, the words uttered by her were beyond my understanding. Hurrying to the entrance, I checked my bag that was supposed to be there, only to find that the master key, which should have been inside, was nowhere to be found. While I was desperately searching the entrance area, my father-in-law appeared with a full smile and declared loudly, "Looking for this? From now on, we will live in this house. I would like you to leave promptly." Holding the master key taken from my handbag, the sight of my father-in-law looking down on me sent chills down my spine. Next to him, I saw my mother-in-law carelessly throwing my personal belongings outside the entrance. Their secretly planned scheme became clear, and I gave them a stern look on the spot. "I understand." I was at the limit of my patience. I quietly stated, feeling the difficulty of accepting the situation. I gathered my scattered bags and shoes and, while holding back tears, got into the driver's seat of the car and eventually left the premises of my new house. heading straight from the new house to the city hall. I received the necessary documents for divorce proceedings, and upon returning home, I found that numerous essentials, including shoes and clothes that should have been there until the morning, were gone. It was only at that moment that I realized why my mother-in-law was glued to her smartphone during the ride. It was so she could coordinate a plan to take over the new house with her husband. Deeply disappointed, I headed back to the new house. When I pressed the intercom button, my mother-in-law's bright and satisfied voice reached my ears. As if to thwart my attempt to reclaim the house, she locked the door and peeked out through a small gap. When I handed her the divorce papers through the narrow gap, the documents unexpectedly swiftly returned with Gabriel's signature. Just as I expected. I'm glad I prepared beforehand. And thank you for leaving the house-related documents for us, my mother-in-law said smoothly. The mortgage and other related documents for the new house were kept in the new home so that they wouldn't get lost. I calmly tried to resist for the final time, but my mother-in-law coldly sneered at me. I've already contacted the bank. We won't concern ourselves with what happens next, she declared. I'm surprised at your naivety. We're already preparing for refinancing and other necessary procedures, she continued. Shocked, I returned home, quickly packed my and my child's belongings, and prepared to move, relocating to my parents' house within the day. About a month later, an unexpected call came from my mother-in-law. Wondering what it might be about, I answered, only to hear her screaming in an intense tone on the other end. Wait, this is not what we agreed on. You deceived us, she accused me, despite the fact that they were the ones who had devised the scheme. What exactly do you mean? I inquired. My in-laws had deceived me and forcefully took the newly built house from me, thinking I had also already completed the refinancing of the mortgage. However, the miscalculation was, unexpectedly, on their part. Facing a demand for a lump sum repayment from the bank, my mother-in-law had been trying to secure a new mortgage from another bank. However, by proceeding with the contract without paying attention to the mortgage details, she committed two major mistakes. The first error was that the mortgage was solely in my name. My mother-in-law misunderstood that Gabriel and I had taken out a joint mortgage and was appalled at the lump sum amount she was requested to repay. Moreover, she naively thought that being co-borrowers meant only half the mortgage payment would suffice. But reality was not that simple. Repeatedly making unilateral demands at the bank, my mother-in-law eventually got denied and seemed to have ended up securing another mortgage using different financing. Yet, there was another crucial point that she had overlooked. Another miscalculation was related to their age. While I had some leeway in borrowing capacity and term, it was impossible for my in-laws, who were both over 60, to secure funds under the same conditions. My father-in-law had been working as a contract employee for years without a substantial income. My mother-in-law also worked part-time, however only in the mornings, which also didn't amount to much. With that in mind, it was impossible for the two of them to pay off the mortgage for that house. Without properly reviewing the repayment plan, my mother-in-law just peeked at my plan and thought paying the same amount would be fine. As a result, they received a bill exceeding their expectations by more than 3 times the amount. This call was from my mother-in-law, who, noticing an anomaly in their account balance as the payments began, contacted me in a fury. There's nothing I can do even if you tell me. It's impossible for a full-time housewife like you to pay such an amount. I haven't received any explanation from Gabriel, and there must be something behind this. Tell me the truth, now. What do you mean? There's no hidden agenda. In fact, Gabriel has not contributed a single penny to our living expenses since before our child was born. What do you mean? Then who has been paying for the living expenses all this time? I've been working from home, so I certainly have an income. Besides, as far as I know, it's probably more than Gabriel's salary. At my response, my mother-in-law was momentarily lost for words, but I could easily imagine her being flabbergasted on the other end of the phone. Even when our family went out to eat, my mother-in-law and the others usually left the payments to me. It's obvious that the daughter-in-law should pay, they would say, But have they ever considered where that money came from? I don't know what the in-laws spend their earnings on, but it's likely that the two of them, having no savings, were relying on our income for their old age. Fed up with her selfish demands, I ignored her accusations coming from the other end of the phone and ended the call. After that series of events, the calls didn't cease to end, making my phone ring multiple times a day. However, I deliberately chose to avoid answering and consistently ignored her calls. This continued for days, which had a significant impact on my state of mind, but I was resolute. I eventually ended up living with my parents in my family home. Living with 4 people under one roof was more cramped than I had imagined. But by letting go of the new house, I had some breathing room in my financial situation. In anticipation of this new beginning and with my mother in mind, I decided to purchase a reasonably priced used home and renovate it for nursing care. My parents were fully supportive of this plan, and so the decision was made by the entire family. If we were to move, we decided to sell the current house. Surprisingly, selling off our family home went smoother than expected, and a buyer was found quite quickly. Moreover, since land prices were rising at that time, we were fortunate to sell it for far more than expected. This made the move to the new house much easier. The bank procedures also went very smoothly, thanks to the understanding staff. As a result, without any additional expenses, our family was able to acquire a new home. One day, a call from my mother-in-law once again reached me. For some reason, I was groggy that day, and without thinking, I picked up the phone and started the conversation. Her voice came through the phone. "Hey, Isabella, just a little bit would do. Could you lend us some money? After paying off the mortgage, we have nothing left, and we might even get our water service cut off if we can't make the payment." My family home unexpectedly sold for quite a high price. That's how we were able to buy the new house in cash. Why don't you try the same method? Despite the harsh treatment I had received, I was simply dumbfounded that she still sought my help. That's why I shared my experience of when we sold our home. Upon hearing that, her crying suddenly stopped and the call ended abruptly. I was relieved, thinking that I would get no more troublesome calls from her. However, there were still issues remaining. A week later, another call came. "How many times do you plan to deceive us?" Her voice, suddenly berating me, was clearly filled with anger even over the phone. According to her explanation, their house was originally a built-to-sale house, which meant that the house itself had little to no value. Furthermore, because the location of the house was in a bad area, the land value had significantly decreased, leaving it almost worthless. In the end, no buyers appeared, and the in-laws were not only left without any income but also received bills for various handling fees. Since then, I stopped responding to my in-laws' frequent calls, blocked their numbers, and ignored any calls from public phones. Eventually, they seemed to have given up, and no more calls came through. Just when I thought I had regained peace, I got an unexpected call from Gabriel. "Hey, there's a for sale sign in front of my house, and I can't get in." Astonished by Gabriel's carelessness, I explained his mother's actions with a sigh. Gabriel was surprised when he heard my story, unaware of the events. But what really astonished me was his complete lack of reaction to the fact that we were already divorced. Gabriel was angry that the family home had been sold, but it was his mother's doing, and it had nothing to do with me since we were already divorced. A few hours after his call, he called again, apparently having arrived at his new home. However, all I could hear over the phone was the sound of disputes between my mother-in-law and her family. I later found out that Gabriel had a lover at the place he was transferred to. Having lost his home, he was considering living with his lover, but it turned out that his lover was already married. In the end, not only did Gabriel lose his lover, but he also faced alimony charges from the lover's spouse. He lost his job due to his parents' actions and is now working at a company that provides employee dormitories, with his income reduced to less than half of what it used to be. Additionally, I learned that the in-laws had imposed themselves on his new residence and were living there as freeloaders. After remodeling the old house and moving in, our family had started a new chapter in our lives. I have remarried Mr. Brown, an older man who kindly advised me on the house renovations. Having shared experiences of divorce and children, we immediately clicked and are now enjoying fulfilling days based on shared values. Mr. Brown is warm-hearted and actively helps take care of my parents, using his professional knowledge to quickly solve any problems they face, which is incredibly reassuring. While caregiving is challenging, I am deeply satisfied with my current life, living peaceful days with a true swashy husband and lovely children.